Confused by modern dating terms?
Master the slang with Speed Mingle.
Usually when we talk about medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of just extreme precision.
Right.
It's basically like engineering. You'd fall off your bike, you break your arm, you go to the hospital. The x-ray lights up, and there's that, that jagged white line right across the bone. The doctor just points a pen at the screen and says, there it is, right there.
Exactly. It's binary. It's totally undeniable.
Broken or not broken, it's clean, it's definitive. And because it's definitive, you know exactly what the treatment plan is. 6 weeks in a cast.
And psychologically, that is incredibly comforting. Like, as humans, we fundamentally like things to be visible. We want our problems neatly categorized so we know exactly what we're dealing with. We crave the certainty of a label.
But then you step into the world of modern relationships. You step into digital dating, and suddenly that x-ray machine is it's completely shattered. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, honestly, it's entirely murky. You have pain, you have confusion, but there's no clear, jagged line on a screen to point to.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. The binary of, like, single or taken, it barely exists anymore. Everything just operates in this bizarre gray middle ground.
Exactly. I'm Zach.
And I'm Alice.
Welcome to 21st Century Dating Decoded. In this new deep dive episode, we are exploring the Speed Mingle dating slang of the week, cookie jarring.
Yeah.
And we've pulled together a massive stack of sources for you today.
We really have.
Yeah, we're looking at clinical psychology analyses, tech usage reports, YouTube transcripts, and just an absolute ocean of social media discourse. We want to wade into this murky water and finally give you a clear x-ray of what is actually happening in the modern dating minefield.
Because to really understand why behaviors like cookie jarring have become so rampant, we have to look at the environment where they're thriving. You can't understand a fish without looking at the water it swims in, and our water is defined by hyperconnectivity.
Right.
The 2023 global metrics from our sources, they paint a wild picture. There are now 5.35 billion internet users worldwide.
Which is just, it's a number so large it loses meaning until you really break it down.
Precisely. The impact isn't distributed evenly across the board. The data highlights a distinct 14% usage gap. Right now, 79% of youth, so those ages 15 to 24, they're online, compared to 65% of the general population.
So a staggering majority of young people are completely, unequivocally immersed in the digital sphere. It's not just a place they visit, it's where they actually live.
They live there. And the DFI report data goes even further into the daily reality of this. 38% of teenagers spend more than 8 hours a day on social media.
8 hours. That is literally a full-time job.
It is. And I want you to really think about what that means for human connection on a neurological level. When you spend a third of your life scrolling through highly curated profiles, your brain's perception of intimacy, of availability, and reality fundamentally shifts.
Yeah, has to.
This constant digital presence has completely restructured how we seek connection. It creates what clinicians actually call the illusion of endless options.
The illusion of endless options. It's like standing in front of a buffet that literally stretches on for miles.
Right.
You have a perfectly good plate of food right in front of you. But if you fundamentally believe there is always something marginally better or hotter or funnier, just, one swipe away, committing to the plate in front of you suddenly feels like a massive, terrifying risk.
Exactly.
You develop this kind of psychological FOMO, but regarding human beings.
That is the exact clinical reality. And that illusion that someone better is always just right in your pocket is the exact breeding ground for the behavior we're dissecting today. But before we get into the mechanics of cookie jarring itself, we really have to look at how rapidly digital culture is changing the very language of intimacy, because language shapes reality.
It really does. The language itself is evolving to match this high-stakes digital marketplace. We've seen terms like ghosting and breadcrumbing become totally mainstream over the last decade, but the slang we're seeing in the sources now is getting sharper and honestly a lot more intense.
Mm-hmm.
For example, there's this massive viral Gen Z slang word right now causing just an absolute uproar, and the word is cracked.
Yes, the discourse around this specific word has completely taken over platforms like TikTok and is fascinating to watch from a sociological standpoint.
It's being used basically as a replacement for having sex. So the sources highlight these videos where a user, maybe they're working at a fast food chain or a retail store, they might post a video saying, I got cracked last night, everyone gets extra fries today. Or like, got cracked so good, I might let you all steal today.
And we really need to look at the intense online division over this term, because the internet is fiercely split on what it actually means for modern dating culture. And just to set the table for you listening, we aren't here to play moral arbiter or tell you which side is right. We are just looking impartially at the cultural friction this word has caused in the source material.
Right, because the debate itself reveals so much about how we view intimacy right now.
Exactly. It's wild looking at the TikTok comments in our sources because people are drawing entirely different conclusions from this one word. Half the internet thinks it's completely toxic and the other half thinks we're all just, overreacting to a joke.
So let's look at the first camp. Perspective one comes from these fierce critics who argue that cracked carries violent and deeply misogynistic undertones. From this viewpoint, the word inherently objectifies women as something to be broken open, unlocked, or dominated.
It treats a person like a safe that was cracked or like a code that was beaten.
Right. These critics draw parallels to older slang like smash. They argue that it perpetuates this really archaic, subtly destructive idea that a person, particularly a woman, is somehow damaged, altered, or loses value after intimacy.
Yeah.
The argument is that calling an act of love or connection a strangely violent word, it isn't just harmless slang. It programs a certain level of callousness into how we treat each other.
But the pushback against that interpretation is incredibly vocal in the sources, too. Extremely vocal. The proponents of the term perspective two, argue that it is completely gender-neutral in practice. They point out that women use it just as frequently as men to brag about their own experiences. The fast food worker example you mentioned, often those are young women posting those exact videos.
Interesting.
Their primary argument is that critics are vastly overanalyzing a mundane, silly word. Their stance is essentially, it isn't that deep, and that attributing dark psychological malice to a viral joke is a massive overreaction by people who just don't understand internet humor.
It's the classic internet debate, right? Like, is it a symptom of societal decay or is it just a meme? But looking at the sources, I noticed something that kind of transcends whether the word itself is inherently violent or just a joke. Regardless of which side of that linguistic debate is right, the underlying reality is undeniable. This slang perfectly reflects a highly sensation-seeking modern dating culture. We are seeing intimacy reduced to a viral score.
Wait, what do you mean by a viral score?
I mean, it's the gamification of sex. A private, intimate act is instantly translated into social currency online. You are literally trading the fact that you had sex for internet clout, or for the joke of giving away free fries for views. The intimacy itself isn't the point anymore. The broadcast of the intimacy is the point.
That is an excellent observation. It is the absolute commodification of human connection. When we reduce intimacy to a punchline, a score, or just a piece of content, it fundamentally lowers the psychological barrier for treating human beings as disposable objects. Because if an intimate encounter is just a funny TikTok update, then the person you had that encounter with is just a prop in your content.
The completely disposable prop.
Exactly. Which transitions us perfectly to the core behavior of this deep dive. If cracked represents the gamification of sex, cookie jarring represents the industrialization of the backup plan.
The industrialization of the backup plan. That is such a chilling phrase. Let's clearly define the jar for the listener so they know exactly what we're dealing with here. What is cookie jarring?
Well, in clinical terms, cookie jarring is the practice of keeping someone in reserve, treating them as a security blanket or a backup option while you actively pursue a primary romantic interest. You are purposely keeping a real human being on the back burner, actively maintaining their emotional investment in you, strictly to ensure you don't end up alone if your first choice falls through.
Let's really lean into the metaphor here because it's so perfectly descriptive of the emotional dynamic. Think about how you interact with the physical cookie jar in your kitchen.
Okay.
You do not reach for a cookie when you want a substantial, nutritious 5-course meal. You don't eat a cookie to sustain yourself long term.
No, absolutely not. It provides zero actual sustenance.
You reach for it when you need a quick sugar rush. You grab a cookie when you've had a bad day at work, when you're stressed, or when you just need a temporary cheap pick-me-up. The jarrer in this dynamic reaches out to the backup person, their cookie, only when their primary relationship hits a snag.
Right?
If they get rejected by the person they actually want, their ego takes a hit. So what do? They reach into the jar, text you, and get a quick ego boost to feel desirable again.
That's exactly how the dynamic operates. And the most painful part for the victim is what happens next. Once that emotional sugar rush wears off, once the jarrer's ego is validated, or, the minute their primary partner texts them back and comes back around,
We put the lid right back on.
They put the lid right back on the jar. They place you back on the shelf in the dark.
That is incredibly manipulative. But I can already hear some people pushing back on this. I'm sure someone listening is wondering, wait, isn't dating around normal? Isn't this just exploring your options before committing? What about ethical non-monogamy?
That is a crucial, non-negotiable, clinical distinction that the sources make. Cookie jarring is absolutely not ethical non-monogamy or ENM. And it isn't just casual dating either. ENM relies entirely on informed consent, radical honesty, and transparency.
Right.
All parties involved know exactly what the dynamic is. If you're casually dating multiple people and you are upfront about it, like, hey, I'm seeing other people and keeping things light, that's fine. That is transparent.
Everyone has all the information to make their own choices.
Precisely. Cookie jarring, on the other hand, relies entirely on the intentional maintenance of ambiguity. The deception is the foundational pillar of the strategy.
The person in the jar has absolutely no idea they are a backup.
None. They believe, based on the jar's calculated actions, intermittent affection, and mixed signals, that they are a priority. Or, at the very least, they're led to believe that the relationship is building towards something exclusive. The jar purposely feeds them just enough hope to keep them invested while secretly pursuing someone else. They are being kept in the dark by design.
You can't fix a problem until you properly diagnose it. That goes back to the X-ray analogy from earlier. And the sources make it very clear that cookie jarring is just one specific mutation of modern dating avoidance.
Yeah.
There's actually a whole clinical taxonomy of backup dating out there.
Yes, researchers and clinicians have actually had to develop a specific, specialized vocabulary to categorize interpersonal distress in the digital age. It's no longer just, you broke my heart or she broke my heart. We need precise terms.
Yeah, we need the labels.
Labeling these behaviors is vital because it allows the victim to externalize the distress. It stops the internal monologue of what is wrong with me and shifts it to an objective view of this is a documented toxic strategy that this person is employing.
So let's methodically break down these tactics. We want you, the listener, to be able to diagnose your own situationships. Let's start with benching. How is that different from cookie jarring?
Well, benching borrows directly from sports psychology and terminology. It is literally keeping a potential partner on the sidelines. You aren't actively dating them, not really.
Yeah.
You are just giving them enough sporadic attention, maybe replying to a story here, grabbing a very casual coffee there, to keep them in their uniform.
You want them warmed up and available just in case your starter gets injured, or in this case, the relationship fails.
Exactly. It's passive. You aren't stringing them along with grand promises. You're just keeping them in your orbit.
Got it. So benching is passive, but then there's cushioning. That sounds a bit softer, but I'm guessing it's not.
Cushioning is much more active. It's a preemptive strike. This is when someone is actively, exclusively dating a primary interest, but they intentionally keep multiple secondary options secretly engaged to soften the fall if a breakup happens.
It is quite literally emotional bubble wrap.
That's a great way to put it. They're terrified of hitting the hard ground of loneliness if their relationship blows up. So instead of dealing with that fear, they build a cushion made out of other people's affections.
Then we have breadcrumbing. This is one we hear a lot in the cultural zeitgeist right now.
Breadcrumbing is slightly different because it often lacks the intent to ever actually date the person. It is sending sporadic, incredibly low-effort crumbs of attention. A random meme on a Tuesday, a late-night you up text, as simple like on an Instagram post from 3 years ago.
Why do they do that if they don't want to date you?
Is done purposely to maintain a sense of power and to get a tiny hit of narcissistic supply. They want to know you are still waiting for them, with absolutely zero intention of ever committing or taking the relationship further. It's an ego-feeding mechanism.
And finally, the most visually repulsive term in the taxonomy, roaching.
Roaching is intense. This is actively hiding the fact that you are dating multiple people, usually while maintaining a false image of complete exclusivity with one partner. The implication of the term is brilliant, though gross. If you turn on the kitchen lights and see one single roach scurry across the floor,
You know for a fact there are 100 others hidden in the walls.
exactly. If you catch them lying about one other person they are seeing, you are likely dealing with an infestation of hidden partners.
So, to bring it back to our main topic and try to use a unified analogy here to help you remember the differences. If benching is keeping a substitute player on the sidelines and cushioning is wearing emotional bubble wrap, cookie jarring is like hoarding a massive stash of snacks in your pantry while you are currently sitting at a Michelin star restaurant eating a 5-course dinner. strictly because you're paranoid the kitchen might shut down before dessert.
That is the perfect analogy. You are actively pursuing and enjoying the five-course dinner, but you are selfishly hoarding the snacks at home, depriving them of being eaten by anyone else, just to guarantee you won't experience a moment of hunger.
Which brings up a massive, agonizing question for anyone who has ever been on the receiving end of this. If being treated as a backup, like a side snack or a cookie, is so inherently toxic, so manipulative, and so painful, why is it so incredibly hard for the victim to just walk away?
It's a huge question.
Right. You hear friends tell victims, just leave them. And they just can't. Why?
To answer that, we have to look past logic and look at the actual neuroscience of the jar. When you are in this dynamic, it is rarely a lack of willpower keeping you there. It is a literal neurological hijacking.
A neurological hijacking. Break that down for us.
It all comes down to a behavioral psychology concept called intermittent reinforcement. This was discovered by B.F. Skinner when he was studying rats, and it is the exact same psychological mechanism that makes casino slot machines so wildly, ruinously addictive.
Okay, wait. How does a dating dynamic act like a Vegas slot machine in your brain?
It's all about the delivery schedule of the reward. When affection, attention, or validation is delivered predictably and consistently, like in a healthy relationship, your brain feels safe. Love is a steady stream. You don't obsess over it because you know it's there.
Right. If you know the sun is going to rise, you don't panic every night.
Exactly. But in a cookie jarring dynamic, the reward is entirely unpredictable. The jar might text you back instantly and be intensely communicative, warm, and loving for 2 straight days. They make you feel like you are on top of the world.
That's the jackpot. The bells are ringing, the coins are spilling out.
Yes. Your brain experiences a massive, overwhelming surge of dopamine. You feel euphoric, but then, without warning, they abruptly go silent. They pull away to focus on their primary targets. You text them, nothing. A day goes by, nothing.
And suddenly you're staring at a blank screen.
And deprived of that expected reward, your brain enters a literal state of chemical withdrawal. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, activates in your brain.
The HPA axis. So that's an actual physiological response.
Yes, a very real one. Your system perceives this sudden withdrawal of affection as a primal threat, and it floods your body with cortisol. This induces severe chronic anxiety, your chest tightens, you can't sleep, you obsess over your phone.
You are literally in chemical withdrawal from a text message.
Yes, and here's the cruelest part of the trap. When they finally do text you back after 4 days of agonizing silence, the sudden, overwhelming relief from that cortisol-induced panic triggers an even larger dopamine surge than the original jackpot did.
Oh, wow. Wait, so the pain actually makes the eventual reward feel better?
Clinically, yes. This variable ratio schedule creates what we call a trauma bond or a stress bond. The victim's nervous system begins to fundamentally associate the intense anxiety, followed by the sudden, unpredictable relief, with passion.
They mistake the panic for butterflies.
Exactly. They mistake a high-stakes, hypervigilant state of nervous system dysregulation for deep, profound love.
So wait, let me make sure I'm understanding the implication of this. Are you saying that unpredictable, toxic behavior actually maintains a person's loyalty better and stronger than a predictable, healthy, kind partner would?
It is a dark, highly counterintuitive clinical truth, but yes, inconsistent, randomized rewards maintain human behavior much more effectively than predictable ones. The brain learns to chase the immense high of that sudden relief. It makes it neurologically excruciating to terminate the cycle.
That's wild.
When you try to leave a cookie jar, your body will literally fight your logical brain. Your logic says, this is bad, but your body says, I need the dopamine hit of them texting me back to survive this anxiety.
That is terrifying. But honestly, it really removes the shame from the victim.
Yeah.
If you are listening to this and you've been stuck in a dynamic like this, you aren't weak and you aren't stupid. Your nervous system has literally been trained by an intermittent reinforcement schedule to crave the chaos.
Precisely. The shame does not belong to the victim.
But that begs the next major question. Who exactly is doing the jarring? Because if they are employing a tactic that acts like a slot machine on someone's brain, are they calculating Machiavellian masterminds sitting in a dark lair, plotting to ruin lives and hijack nervous systems?
Usually, no. And this is a very important pivot into the psychology of the jarrer themselves. Cookie jarring is rarely driven by pure, calculated malice or sadism. According to the clinical experts in our sources, it is overwhelmingly a desperate, maladaptive defense mechanism.
Really? So it's not about hurting the other person on purpose?
Right. It is driven by profound internal insecurity and a fundamental inability to self-soothe.
So they're essentially using other human beings as pacifiers to regulate their own emotions.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it, yes. And it almost always traces back to attachment trauma from their early life. The sources point out that we see two primary insecure attachment styles utilizing this exact tactic, but for entirely opposite contradictory reasons. First, you have avoidant attachment.
How does an avoidant person use the jar? Because aren't they the ones who want to be alone?
Avoidant individuals are terrified of true, deep intimacy. It feels suffocating, engulfing, and dangerous to them. So they use backburners to purposely maintain emotional distance from their primary partner. By keeping multiple backup options in reserve, they protect themselves from the perceived danger of total vulnerability with any one person.
So it dilutes the intimacy. Like, if I have 10% of my heart in a cookie jar, I can never give 100% to my partner, so I can never be fully destroyed if they leave.
Exactly. It's a preemptive defense against engulfment. But what about the other side of the spectrum, the anxious attachment style?
Right, the anxious person is usually the one clinging to the relationship, right?
Yes, individuals with an anxious attachment style are terrified of being pushed away. They suffer from a profound, deep-seated terror of abandonment. So they use backups as an emotional safety net, ensuring they are never, ever left totally alone.
It's just constant fear.
If their primary relationship feels even slightly shaky, maybe their partner is just busy at work for a few hours, their internal panic alarms go off. They instantly reach into the cookie jar for quick validation to soothe that terror.
It is wild to think about that. Two completely opposite psychological profiles. One running away from intimacy as fast as they can, and one running desperately toward it, clinging to it. Both end up using the exact same toxic strategy to cope with their fears.
It really highlights just how universal the human fear of rejection is. We just express it in completely different, highly destructive ways.
And speaking of how we express it, the data on who actually maintains these backburners is totally fascinating. I want to bring up the demographics of the backup plan. There's research from the Parkview Health Repository mentioned in the sources, and it introduces this concept called the marriage paradox.
Yes. The marriage paradox is a truly cynical, sobering finding. Logically, you would assume that once someone says, I do, commits to a life partner, and enters a legally binding marriage, they would immediately empty the cookie jar, right?
You would definitely hope so. I mean, you found the person, you've made the ultimate commitment. The jar should be smashed into 1,000 pieces.
But the data reveals the exact opposite. Married individuals actually report having more committed backburners than casual single daters do.
Wait, hold on. I need to make sure I heard that right. Married people have more backups than single people.
Yes. The researchers found that married individuals often view these backburners as a form of partner insurance. The deeper the primary commitment, the higher the subconscious fear of what happens if it fails. So they maintain a robust insurance policy.
That is incredibly depressing.
It is, but there is a nuance to the data. The research notes that marriage does act as a behavioral buffer. While the jar might technically be fuller in terms of sheer numbers, the communication with these backups is much less frequent and largely remains strictly platonic. They are keeping the option open mentally, thinking, if my spouse leaves me, I could date X, but they restrict the behavior in reality.
Okay, so it's an insurance policy they're paying the absolute minimum premium on just to keep the account active. What about gender differences? Because I know people always want to know, is this a guy thing or a girl thing? Does the data show men and women utilizing the jar differently?
Yes, quite significantly, in ways that align with traditional socialization. Men generally report a higher sheer number of sexual backburners. And when they do communicate with their backups, it tends to have a more flirtatious or sexual tone. They are actively keeping sexual options open.
And women.
Women, on the other hand, maintain more strictly platonic backburners. Ex-boyfriends they stayed friends with, guy friends who always had a crush on them. But here is the massive catch the data points out. Women tend to significantly overestimate the actual commitment levels of those platonic friendships.
What do you mean by overestimate?
They view these friends as deep, reliable emotional safety nets. They think, if my husband leaves me, John will be there for me. But in reality, if the crisis actually hit, John might not be nearly as willing to be the emotional bedrock they assumed he would be. They perceive a stronger safety net than actually exists.
That is a staggering look at human behavior. It really shows how pervasive This safety net mentality is across the board. Regardless of age, gender, or marital status, we're a species terrified of falling.
Absolutely.
But let's bring this back to the individual listening. If the urge to build a safety net is this common, how does a person know if they are currently trapped in someone else's cookie jar?
That brings us to the clinical presentation of the victim. Being treated as the backup isn't just annoying or frustrating. It triggers a systemic, slow-motion dismantling of a person's self-esteem. It destroys you from the inside out. Clinicians have mapped this out through what we call the 5 stages of self-worth erosion.
I want to spend some real time here. Let's break down exactly what happens to the victim internally, psychologically, during these 5 stages. Let's say someone is listening right now, sitting in their car, and they are wondering why they feel so terrible in their current situationship.
Stage 1 is hope. And it sounds positive, but it's insidious. The victim believes the narrative of potential. They are experiencing confirmation bias. They think they're just incredibly busy at work this month. Once this huge project is over, they'll finally commit.
Right, making excuses.
Exactly. Or they just got out of a bad breakup, they just need time. They are treating the tiny breadcrumbs of attention as a promise of a future 5-course meal.
They're falling in love with the potential of the person, not the reality of the behavior, which inevitably, as the reality fails to match the potential, leads to stage 2.
Stage 2 is confusion, which quickly morphs into self-blame. The cognitive dissonance of the jar's mixed signals becomes too much to bear. So the victim internalizes the blame to make sense of the chaos. The mental script becomes, what am I doing wrong? If I were just more supportive or funnier or prettier or less demanding, they would finally choose me.
That's heartbreaking.
They stop looking at the jar's toxic, inconsistent behavior and start mining their own personality for flaws.
And once you start blaming yourself, your immediate instinct is to try to change yourself to fix the problem, which brings us right into stage 3.
Stage 3 is accommodation, and this is where you really start to lose yourself. To survive the painful ambiguity, the victim actively shrinks their own life to perfectly fit the tiny jar they've been placed in.
How does that look in practice? Like, why would a previously confident person shrink themselves?
It's a survival mechanism to avoid triggering the jar's withdrawal. The victim will start declining weekend plans with their own friends, purposely keeping their Friday and Saturday nights entirely open, just in case the jar texts them at 9 p.m. They stop expressing their own needs because they don't want to be perceived as needy. They lower their own standards for respect entirely just to keep the connection alive.
You make yourself as small and convenient as possible so they won't throw you away.
Yeah.
That leads to stage 4, which sounds like the darkest point of the entire process.
It is. Stage 4 is identity loss. The victim's locus of control shifts entirely to the external. They lose their autonomy. Every single decision they make, from what outfit they wear in the morning to what movie they post about on their story, is filtered entirely through the imagined reaction of the jarrer.
Oh, wow.
They just want a sign that they matter to this person, and in that desperate pursuit, they completely lose sight of who they were before the situationship even started. The jar becomes their entire universe.
You become a ghost of yourself. But human beings are resilient. Eventually, the body and the mind simply cannot sustain that level of hypervigilance and self-denial, right?
Correct. Which brings us to the final stage, stage 5, the breaking point. This is the crisis of clarity. The victim hits a physiological and emotional wall of absolute exhaustion. The anxiety simply becomes too heavy for the nervous system to carry for one more day. The slot machine payoff stops working.
The dopamine hit isn't enough anymore.
This exhaustion forces a transition. The illusion shatters, and they are finally forced to confront the reality and begin reclaiming their agency.
If you are listening to this right now and you are recognizing your own internal monologue in those stages, please know you are not alone, and it is a documented physiological response. But to help you get to that breaking point faster, to bypass the confusion and diagnose the reality of your relationship today, we need to look at the external actions of the jarrer. Stop looking at your own flaws and start looking at their behavior. The sources have compiled a phenomenal behavioral checklist for this.
Yes, these are the 7 core red flags. This is the empirical, observable data you need to audit your own dating life. The goal here is to bypass their charm, ignore their words, and look strictly at their actions.
Let's run through them. Red flag number 1. And the sources emphatically call this the ultimate red flag.
Pocketing, or a social siloing. This is when you realize you're being intentionally hidden from every aspect of their real, tangible life. You haven't met their friends, you haven't met their family, and you are completely absent from their social media presence.
You are a ghost. You only exist in the confines of their apartment or your apartment.
Exactly. And you have to understand, this is a highly tactical move. The jarrer must keep your presence a secret. Why? Because they cannot jeopardize the primary relationship they are actually pursuing. Or if they are single, they need to maintain a completely available image to attract a new primary prospect.
Makes sense.
If you have been dating someone for 3 or 4 months and you haven't met a single friend, you are not a private romance. You are being pocketed.
Red flag number 2. Vague commitment.
This is the masterful dodging of the DTR, the define the relationship conversation. If you finally build up the courage to bring up exclusivity and they immediately hit you with deflections like, I just really don't like labels, or let's just see where it goes, why ruin a good thing?
Yeah.
But then they continue to expect you to act like their loyal partner in private.
They are intentionally maintaining ambiguity.
Yes, they want the benefits of a relationship without the accountability.
Now, red flag number 3 plays right into that slot machine neuroscience we spent so much time on earlier, the 72-hour MIA. But let me play devil's advocate here. If someone disappears for a few days, aren't they maybe just legitimately overwhelmed with work or family stuff? Why is this a definitive red flag?
Context is everything. In a healthy dynamic, if someone is overwhelmed, they communicate it. Hey, work is insane, I'll be off my phone for a few days. The 72-hour MIA in cookie jarring is characterized by randomly vanishing with absolutely no warning. You are having a great week, texting constantly, feeling super connected, and suddenly they are gone. Silence. And the real key is the return. They reappear 3 days later as if absolutely nothing happened. No apology, no explanation.
Just a casual, hey, crazy week, you up?
Exactly. That proves you are being accessed primarily when their primary option is unavailable, or when they suddenly need an ego-validating pick-me-up. You aren't a priority on their schedule. You are a contingency plan.
Which leads perfectly to red flag number 4, passive initiation or one-sided effort.
Take a hard look at your text threads. You will likely find that you are doing 100% of the logistical planning and emotional labor. You suggest the dates, you pick the restaurant, you initiate the depth conversations. They are just passively along for the ride. More tellingly, they treat you as a fallback. They will almost never commit to a Friday night plan on a Tuesday. They only agree to see you at the very last minute when their original preferred schedule falls through.
Red flag number 5, evasive future talk.
This one is very easy to test. Try bringing up a concert that is happening 3 months from now. Or casually mention potential holiday plans for the winter. A cookie jar will immediately change the subject, make a joke, or become visibly physically uncomfortable.
Right, because they don't plan on being around.
Exactly. They cannot and will not engage in long-term structural entanglement because, frankly, they do not see you in their long-term future.
Red flag number 6, guarded phone behavior.
They treat their digital device like it holds classified state secrets. They angle the screen away from you when they text. They always place it face down on the table. They take it to the bathroom with them every single time. This highly guarded behavior suggests the heavy cognitive load of managing multiple covert connections. If they are hiding their screen from you, they're hiding a primary option or they're hiding another cookie.
And finally, red flag number 7, which brings us back to biology. The sources call this the polyvagal gut feeling. Explain how polyvagal theory ties into this red flag.
Polyvagal theory deals with how our autonomic nervous system subconsciously scans our environment for cues of safety or danger, which is a process called neuroception. If you feel chronically anxious, undervalued, or confused in the relationship, despite the jar's occasional warmth or sweet words, you must listen to your body. Your intuition alarm bells are ringing for a biological reason.
Your body knows before your brain does.
Exactly. The body's nervous system senses the biological threat of inconsistency, deception, and emotional danger long before the logical brain can fully articulate it. If you feel a constant heavy pit in your stomach when you think about them, or your heart races every time they take an hour to reply, your nervous system is explicitly telling you that you are not safe in this dynamic.
So let's step back and look at the macro picture here. We have an entire generation of daters experiencing this profound level of psychological exhaustion. The sheer cognitive load of constantly decoding mixed signals, surviving the slot machine dopamine withdrawals, and policing your own behavior to stay in the jar is literally draining the life out of people. The modern dating landscape has become so agonizing that we are actually seeing Gen Z turn to extreme, almost dystopian technological solutions to bypass human interaction entirely.
Yes, the exhaustion has birthed an algorithmic escape hatch.
Enter Ditto AI. This is a startup mentioned in our sources that is currently sweeping across California college campuses, originating out of UC Berkeley. And their approach to solving dating fatigue is absolutely wild. Instead of swiping endlessly through profiles and trying to decipher if someone is benching you, users hand over their personal data to an AI agent.
And then the AI takes over completely. The human element of the search is entirely removed.
Yes. The AI runs 1,000 simulations of hypothetical dates between your profile and other users in their database, all in a matter of seconds. It uses highly complex predictive algorithms to find a mathematical, statistically probable match based on those 1,000 simulated interactions.
And the automation goes way beyond just finding the match. The platform has successfully arranged over 12,000 actual physical dates with a reported 92% second date rate. It removes all of what they call the brain work. The AI literally creates the itinerary for the date based on your combined interests, and it even provides you with a list of conversation starters based on the simulated chemistry it detected during the hypothetical dates.
I want to highlight a quote from a beta user of the app that is featured in our sources. They said, and I quote, "It takes the brain work out of a brain-dead process." When you look at the sheer soul-crushing exhaustion caused by cookie jarring, cushioning, and breadcrumbing, well, isn't this exactly what exhausted daters need? Why shouldn't we want a safe, statistically proven partner handed to us on a silver platter, completely bypassing the trauma of the jar?
It is incredibly appealing on the surface, especially when you are in stage 5 burnout. But the clinical critique of this technology is stark. From a psychological and sociological standpoint, we have to look at the dark side of this massive automation. It immediately brings to mind the famous Black Mirror episode, Hang the DJ, where an algorithm runs millions of simulations to dictate exactly who you date and for exactly how long.
It really is life imitating dystopian art.
Truly. And while Ditto AI might successfully shield its users from the immediate visceral pain of being cookie jarred, it risks a severe systemic depersonalization of romance. By attempting to completely sanitize the mating process, to remove all risk, all ambiguity, and all failure, we strip away essential human agency.
We lose the messiness of being human.
Exactly. We lose the emotional resilience that is naturally built by navigating rejection and heartbreak. We lose the authentic, terrifying vulnerability required to build real, unsimulated trust. When you constantly outsource your intuition, your polyvagal gut feelings to an algorithm, you atrophy your own emotional intelligence. As the clinical warning in our sources perfectly states, your heart doesn't run on Wi-Fi. You cannot automate the soul's work of falling in love.
Your heart doesn't run on Wi-Fi. That is a brilliant line to remember. So if we accept that we can't outsource our love lives to AI, and we absolutely refuse to remain trapped in the cookie jar, how do we actually escape in the real world? How does a listener sitting in their car right now break the glass of the jar?
You have to transition from passive waiting to assertive clinical action. The sources outline a very specific step-by-step clinical protocol for reclaiming your agency and smashing the jar.
Step 1, the relational audit.
This ties directly back to what we just discussed. You have to check your physiological baseline. Stop looking at their potential. Stop meticulously reading into the punctuation of their text to find a hidden meaning. Look entirely inward. Ask yourself one binary question. Does thinking of this person bring me a deep, consistent sense of security, or does it give me a pit in my stomach?
Right.
If your nervous system is in a constant humming state of hypervigilance, you have your answer. The data of your body is the absolute truth.
And step 2 is taking that somatic truth and asserting it in the real world. This is the DTR script, the non-negotiable boundary. The sources provide literal script. If you are ready to smash the jar, this is exactly what you say to them. Let me read it. I need consistency in my relationships. What you're offering right now isn't that, and I'm choosing to step away. I'm looking for a priority, not a backup plan.
Notice how clean that is. It is definitive. It doesn't ask for them to change. It simply states a fact and enforces a boundary, leaving absolutely no room for their trademark ambiguity.
But saying those words, that requires an immense amount of courage, especially when your brain is chemically addicted to that intermittent reinforcement we talked about. Your body is screaming for the dopamine hit of their approval. How does a victim find the sheer strength to hit send on that text and enforce that boundary?
They find it through the final step of the protocol. Protective indignation.
Protective indignation. Explain how that works.
Yes, it is the clinical concept of functional anger. Usually in society, we are taught to suppress anger, to view it as a negative or toxic emotion. But in this specific context of abuse or manipulation, anger is a vital tool for survival. When you truly realize that you have been treated as a side snack, that your genuine, beautiful vulnerability was callously used to fluff someone else's fragile ego while they actively pursued another person, you should feel angry.
It is entirely justified to be furious about that.
It is completely justified, and you use that very valid, fiery anger to fuel your exit velocity. Protective indignation is the energetic catalyst needed to overpower the dopamine addiction of the slot machine. It cuts through the fog of confusion. It allows you to finally enforce hard boundaries, to block their number without guilt, and to absolutely refuse to accept any more of their breadcrumbs.
So as we wrap up this massive exploration of the modern dating minefield, I want to leave our listeners with something profound to carry with them. We've talked extensively about the neurobiology of the slot machine effect, how our brains get hijacked by toxic behavior, and the massive societal shift toward gamified intimacy. Where do we go from here individually?
I want to leave you with a final concept to deeply mull over. If our nervous systems are, through a combination of evolutionary biology and collective modern trauma, currently wired to mistake toxic unpredictability for passion, well, then maybe the most revolutionary, radical thing we can possibly do in the 21st century is to actively reprogram ourselves. Maybe the ultimate act of rebellion in modern dating is to consciously learn to find predictability, safety, and consistency thrilling rather than boring.
Finding safety thrilling instead of boring. Wow. That completely rewires how we look at relationships. If consistency becomes the ultimate turn-on, the cookie jars lose all their power. And it brings us right back to the medical x-ray from the very beginning of the show. We don't have to settle for diagnostic muddy waters. We don't have to live our lives in the murky, painful ambiguity of the cookie jar. We can demand the clean, definitive clarity of a partner who enthusiastically chooses us every single day.
We deserve nothing less than being someone's absolute priority.
Absolutely. That wraps up our Speed Mingle Dating Slang of the Week on cookie jarring. We encourage you to subscribe and listen to 21st Century Dating Decoded. If you want to connect in real life, attend a Speed Mingle event in your area. And if an event is not in your area, contact Speed Mingle to become a host or event venue. Stay safe out there.
Thanks for watching and listening to the Speed Mingle Network.